people everywhere, you know, in their little towns and, you know, villages and hamlets or in cities, you know, that, right, he's a hippie. I never thought Manson really was a hippie. He never actually called himself a hippie. He called himself a slippy. And his brief was to slip under the consciousness of the hippies because they were so sort of complacent. And, you know, so again, you know, there's so many contradictions at play here, but, you know, the popular personification of Manson, the maniac, the murderer, the Messiah, the crazed Messiah, has endured. And as I said to you, you know, before we spoke, you know, don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. Manson's great copy. I mean, he's the lunatic. And of course now he's accepted that role, you know, so when you see the interviews in prison with the swastika and the shaved head and, you know, the crazy stuff, you know, all going on, you know, he's accepted that part. He was never really like that. He's become what the prosecution wanted him to be.
Well, then tell us, what did you find that he was really like? Because we know he was kind of involved in the music industry and stuff like that with the Beach Boys and stuff and Terry Melcher. What did you find about the real Manson?
Okay. Manson was... Manson is a creation of the 60s. I don't think there's any other decade in the 20th century that would have allowed him a voice. And to me, you know, his timing was impeccable, you know, to be released in March 1967 in LA and then to make his way up to Haight-Ashbury. You know, I mean, this for him was you know, an incredible moment. And of course, as we know in Haight-Ashbury, in that summer of love, people were given a voice. You know, and someone like Manson, who would have been just otherwise sort of pretty much ignored as a hobo or tramp, you know, was you know, they used to call him, what was it, the gardener in Haight-Ashbury. You know, it's the guy who planted seeds in young people's heads. You know, and you know, all these hundreds of thousands of people gravitating to San Francisco, looking for an answer. And of course, you've got this guy who's just come out of prison. He's got that collateral of, you know, being slightly edgy. He sings, he plays guitar. His songs were unusual. They definitely were unusual for the time. Many of the lyrics that he put in his songs were sort of filched from his delving into Scientology, which again, you know, is pretty primitive stuff at that point. So there was, you know, these are quite, I mean, if your listeners want to go onto YouTube, you'll find all these sessions that he did way back in 67 and 68. And they're unusual songs. So, you know, I'm of the belief that actually more than anything, he wanted to be a successful musician. And he, as is evident from his fraternization with people in the music industry, he was after some sort of record contract. People have said to me, no, he wasn't. And I said, well, you know, you're chasing the likes of Neil Young and Dennis Wilson and Terry Melcher and others. There's something going on here, you know. So I think really his main thing at that point was to assume some sort of status as a songwriter, singer-songwriter, of which there was quite a few at the time. So I think that, and as we know with anyone who, you know, plays a guitar, especially amongst teenagers, you know, it gave him another side to his personality. So it was quite a package, as they say, you know, back then. And this is the other thing, you know, which he really wasn't a maniac, because if he was a maniac, nobody would have hung around him. It's the other point, you know, I'm sort of pains to point out that he was actually a very likable, engaging, charismatic individual that young people were drawn to him, you know, like a bit of a Pied Piper. So, you know, it can't have been all bad. If it had been all bad, there would be only maybe one or two people around him. So, you know, he was a very likable guy. I encourage your listeners to try and find his first recording session at Universal in September 1967, which is online. And you have, in between these songs, a very happy, smiling, evidently character who's, you know, just a likable individual. So I found that interesting. It certainly went against the grain of everything else I've been told. But evidently, you know, if he was a creepy, nasty, vicious sort of character, there would be no followers. So, that was the attraction. I mean, another, without going too far off tangent, he had obviously his commune, which established itself on the fringes of Los Angeles the following year. And there was a very eminent journal in San Francisco called the Journal of Psychedelic Drugs, which commissioned a study on community living and group commune living. And of all the hundreds of communes that are sprung up around the hinterlands of San Francisco, right through northern and southern California, they chose Manson's commune to do a feature on. So, this is this is against the grain of what went on later, and that's much like the hippie dream, much like, as anyone who's lived in communes or in alternative communities, there are such things as severe downers, and that came later. But certainly at the beginning, no, he was a likable individual, and was a jovial character. So I found that fascinating, to be honest with you, and I wanted to give that as much space as possible because, again, all the previous accounts of Manson, where he was a nutcase, a lunatic, but as I said, no one would hang around him. So.
Well, a couple of questions.
Things definitely did change.
You mentioned that someone did a study or a book. Who was it that did the study of his commune?
Your listeners may know of the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, which was a sort of very eminent alternative medical clinic, which was run by some by doctors and psychologists and psychiatrists, and they had a house journal called the Journal of Psychedelic Drugs. Okay. And they commissioned this study into commune life and chose Manson's commune. So, as I say, Manson was probably well known, and the group commune structure, I think the actual article was called. So they were taken seriously. They actually were taken seriously early on. Again, I didn't know this, and I think it was important to highlight that.
Yeah, I never heard of that. And it's interesting, too, because the picture we have of Manson was framed by Vincent Bugliosi,
Correct.
And then we look at his later life, and we see how he has this theory of, Lee Harvey Oswald being the lone gunman. The guy actually obviously has an agenda, you know what I mean, and what he wants to present to us. I don't think that could be...
Yeah, very fair point. And Bugliosi had a... I mean, if one wants to, again, take it out of context... Bugliosi had a very difficult job trying to convict Manson of, 9 counts of first-degree murder when he wasn't involved with any of them, or certainly involved in the murders, I should say. So he had to construct a theory around Manson. And it was very shaky, tenuous, I think, that he managed to successfully bring that about. Certainly Manson was an accessory and a likely possible conspiratorial role, but that's really it. And I think those charges, if they've been brought reasonably, may well have put Manson in for maybe 5 or 6 years in jail on accessory conspiracy charges, not 9 counts of first-degree murder and a death sentence. But as I say, the prosecutor, Manson wasn't present at these murders, so to this day, I still think that's questionable.
Yeah, if it wasn't for this mind control theory, and this cult figure type controlling other people, which was unusual litigation even for the time, you're right. What could they have really got on this guy? And if this was just a regular drug gang, like the Crips or the Bloods, how much could they have gotten away with in the same situation, prosecution-wise?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a situation which basically there was a sort of a moral panic around these murders, and I think that while obviously the people who committed the murders, there was no question about it. As one lawyer once said to me, this wasn't a whodunit, it was a whydunit. And I think that's really interesting because, as I say, I think it was in my research is I went as deep as I could on this. This really wasn't a masterminded hit or a drug hit or anything. It was a knee-jerk reaction to rejection. And it was also tied in with, it was the grubby end of, again, without going too deep into it, but as someone who's experienced commune life and alternative left field communities, when things go down, they go down quite fast, hence my title of my book, Coming Down Fast. And, like anything associated with the drug culture, you get incredible highs and you get frightening lows. And really, these murders came out of a frightening low and a period where Manson's commune was splintering, fracturing, and deconstructing. This wasn't any great, what the prosecutor wanted to call it, helter-skelter murders to start a race war, and where Manson would take control of the world. I mean, that is complete and utter nonsense. It was a grubby, disappointing set of circumstances which allowed this knee-jerk reaction to enact this horror without any real mastermind. People have said to me, it was a drug hit and the mob had engaged Manson's tribe to sort of rip off the drug dealers and that were surrounding certain Hollywood personalities. In my experience of criminals, there's no way the mob will trust Manson and his family with anything. The one drug burn that a character named Tex Watson did prior to the murders was so sloppy and hideous that there's no way that they would be entrusted with that. I think it's an affront to actually even believe that. So that was my take on it, to strip it right back down, and then to see that what you have is this, just a guy who's probably, the whole notion of the so-called Manson family, that if you really want to talk about cult leaders, talk about Jim Jones, the Manson cult at the time of the murders had probably whittled itself down to maybe a hardcore of 8 or 10, with the flotsam and jetsam of associated characters that always hung around them, who were just usually there for drugs or sex. So I don't call that a cult. I call that just a band of no-hopers, really.
It's interesting. I just had a friend recently here in Vegas. She's a local artist, Wonder Hussey. Her name is Sarah Jane Woodall, and it says YouTube channel too as well. It's a local artist model, and she took a trek out there to Barker Ranch.
Oh yeah,
and hiked out there as far as she could get, and took the truck out there as far as she could get. Now, how many people? It was like 10 that made it out to Barker Ranch, because that's a pretty remote area to convince a group of people. And they got a bus out there too somehow.
Yeah, they did indeed. The Go to Wash. I mean, it's the hardest place in the world to go to. At that point, Manson's commune was and Manson himself were really starting to splinter. There was also criminality started coming into this so-called family. Bikers and drug dealers. I think Manson was feeling the heat, so the whole notion of going out to the desert was a sort of an attempt really to sort of escape the lawmakers who were bearing down on them. So it was probably maybe 10 to 20 people out there, and people sort of arriving, because obviously, the word was out that there was this thing going on. But, the conditions out there are not conducive to living, full stop. I mean, it's an impossible place to live, and to sustain yourself. I mean, it would be impossible. So it was more of a dream. I mean, the whole thing of this also is the whole LSD landscape. Was people were trying to process it into a reality. Manson was no different in that, and. So, the big skies and hallucinogenic landscapes that LSD creates in your head, people think, well, we can live that out. Well, it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. So, it was just his little idea to move things away. This move was also in tandem with his rejection by the music community. So, that was a big element in what was going on. Huge elements, because Manson had basically, he had some initial interest by various celebrated people.